Her name was Adaeze, 28 years old, standing on marble that cost more than her entire apartment.
She was just supposed to clean his bathroom. But Ryu Xiangmin noticed everything.
Shower with me. You will love it.
She was just supposed to clean his bathroom. Mop the floors, scrub the tiles, disappear before he noticed she existed. But Ryu Xiangmin noticed everything. He had built an empire on that exact gift. And the moment he stepped through that marble door and found her standing in the steam with her back straight, and her cloth still, and her eyes wide, and her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat, something cracked open inside the most feared man in Seoul that no amount of power had ever touched. He leaned against the doorframe, dark eyes steady, voice so low it barely disturbed the air between them, and he said the words that would change everything. Shower with me. You will love it. Welcome to Black Soul Romance TV series, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Her name was Adiz. Adiz Nuasu, 28 years old, from Enugu, Nigeria, currently standing barefoot on imported Italian marble in a bathroom the size of her entire apartment, holding a scrubbing brush like a weapon and staring at the man the streets of Seoul called a ghost. Not because he was invisible, because by the time you saw him, the damage was already done. She had not come to South Korea looking for this. She had come for the International Hospitality Management internship that had collapsed 3 weeks after she arrived because the sponsoring hotel chain had quietly dissolved its foreign exchange program and forgotten to tell the 22 international participants until they were already here, already committed, already with rent paid and flights too expensive to reverse. She had stayed because going back to Enugu with nothing felt like swallowing glass. She had taken the housekeeping agency job because it paid double what the hotel would have, and because her mother's dialysis treatments did not care about her pride. The agency had placed her in 3 residences before this one. A retired professor in Mapo, a young tech couple in Seongsu, a diplomat's wife in Itaewon who had too many opinions about the angle of folded towels. None of them had prepared her for the Ryu estate. The compound sat behind walls in the northern hills of Syeongbuk-dong, where the city noise went quiet and the air carried pine and something older, something that had decided long ago it did not need to compete with anything below. 3 buildings, a garden with stones placed like punctuation, and a main house that was all dark wood and sharp glass, and the particular silence of a place that had never had to ask for quiet because nothing in it had ever dared make noise without permission. A woman named Director Yoon had met Adiz at the gate. She was small and precise and delivered instructions with the efficiency of a woman who had said them enough times that the words had worn smooth. She handed Adiz a laminated schedule. She pointed at the rooms in order. She said, at the end, with the particular emphasis of a sentence that was carrying more weight than its words, "The East Suite is cleaned on Tuesday and Friday mornings only. You will knock 3 times. You will wait. You will enter only when you are certain the room is unoccupied." Adiz had said, of course. She had meant it. She had knocked 3 times on that first Tuesday. She had waited a full minute, which was longer than protocol required. She had used the master key Director Yoon had issued and stepped into a suite that was immaculate in the way that spaces were immaculate when the person who occupied them moved through the world without disturbing it. The bed pulled tight, the curtains already open, the surface of every table bare and exact. She had moved through it quickly. She was good at quickly. She had cleaned her way to the master bathroom without incident, turned on the shower faucet to let the water run hot for the rinse, and begun on the floor tiles with the particular focused attention she brought to every surface when she was working alone. And then she had started singing. It was her oldest habit and her most embarrassing one. When no one was watching, when the work was steady and her hands were busy, the music came up from somewhere below thought. Old songs her grandmother had sung in the kitchen in Enugu. Igbo melodies that didn't need lyrics to carry everything they were saying. They lived in the intervals, in the way the notes fell toward each other and held. She was singing one now, low under her breath, steam rising from the faucet she had left running, her brush moving in slow circles on the pale stone floor, and she did not hear the door. She did not hear the footsteps. Men like Ryu Seong-min did not announce themselves. They simply arrived, and the room became different around them, and you felt it before you could name it. What she felt was the change in the air, the weight that entered it. She turned. He was in the doorway in a dark shirt that was not yet buttoned, the collar open, his hair damp from what must have been an earlier session in the gym at the far end of the compound, because she could see the controlled tension in his shoulders, the particular held stillness of a body that had been worked hard and had not yet fully come down. He was looking at her. Not at the room, not at the running faucet, not at the cleaning supplies scattered across his bathroom floor. At her. Ryu Seong-min was 35 and he controlled the Ryu Syndicate, which was not called that in any document that had ever survived a government audit, but was understood to be the most precisely run criminal organization in the country. He was tall and lean with a face that had no softness left in it on the surface, sharp jaw and heavy-lidded eyes that catalogued everything they touched. He wore authority the way some men wore expensive clothes. Without thinking about it. Without needing anyone to confirm it was there. He was looking at her like she was something he had not accounted for in any calculation he had ever run, and this fact appeared to interest and irritate him in equal measure. "What are you singing?" he said. She spun around and her elbow caught the cleaning bucket and it tilted, and she grabbed the side of the shower stall to keep from going down, and the bucket rocked but did not fall, and she stood there in the steam with her hand on the marble wall and her heart doing something she could not professionally categorize. "I am so sorry," she said. "I did not know you were here. I knocked. I waited. I checked the room before He held up one hand. She stopped talking. "What were you singing?" he said again. His voice had not changed volume or register. It was the voice of a man who did not need to raise it because the words arrived at exactly the weight he intended, regardless of how quietly he sent them. "It is an Igbo folk song," she said. "My grandmother taught it to me. I apologize. I was not aware I could be heard from. He was not listening to the second half of what she was saying. She could tell because his eyes had moved from her face. They were moving the way they had moved when he first appeared, that slow, complete study, like a man taking inventory of something he did not expect to find in his own possession. The steam from the faucet still running curled between them. The bathroom smelled like the cedar of his soap and the clean mineral smell of her products, and something she could not isolate, something warm and precise and entirely him. She became suddenly aware of how small the space was, how close he was standing, how the doorway behind him was the only way out of it. He stepped inside. Her heartbeat did something complicated. He moved past her to the faucet. He reached past her shoulder to turn it off himself, and in doing so came close enough that she could have reached out and touched the collar of his open shirt without fully extending her arm. And she held very still and breathed through it, and looked at a fixed point on the opposite wall. He smelled like cedar and cold air and something that was not a product, something underneath all of it that was just him. "Your voice is beautiful," he said. He said it the way he might report the temperature outside. Flat, factual, the delivery of information. Not a compliment in the way compliments were usually performed, with the intention behind them visible and angled toward something. Just a thing he had assessed and found to be true. She did not know what to do with that. She said, "Thank you," and began collecting her supplies. He watched her for another long moment, and she could feel it on the back of her neck the way you felt weather coming before you saw it. Then, as she reached for the bucket and turned toward the door, he spoke again. "Shower with me."
Shower with
She stopped
me.
moving.
You will
love
lie.
it. The words dropped into the space between them like a stone into still water. The circles from the impact moved outward and kept going. She turned back to face him slowly. Her expression was contained in the way she had trained it to be contained over years of working in other people's houses and navigating the particular complications of being a young woman in a borrowed space. His expression had not changed. His eyes were on hers, dark and patient and waiting, and she understood with a jolt of something electric and clarifying that he was not performing, not testing, not reaching for something easy. He had said it the way he said everything, because he had considered it and decided it was the most direct statement of what he meant. "No," she said. The word came out barely above a whisper. Not afraid, not offended, just clear. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something smaller and more private than that. A slight softening of something that did not soften easily. "You heard me," he said. Addis picked up her bucket. She looked at him directly, which she had been told by Director Yoon, delicately but unmistakably, was not something the domestic staff were encouraged to do. She looked at him the way she looked at everything she had decided to meet on equal ground. "I am your housekeeper, mister?" "Ryu," she said, and her voice was entirely steady. "I do not shower with employers." And then she walked out of the bathroom and through the suite and down the hallway at a pace that was professional and not hurried, and did not become hurried until she had turned 3 corners and reached the linen corridor and stood against the cool wall with her bucket in both hands and her pulse doing something she had no interest in examining. She told herself she was angry. She was not angry. She was something else entirely, something that had no clean name in any language she spoke, something that sat in her chest like a lit match in a closed room. She told herself she would request a reassignment by the end of the day. She did not request a reassignment. Later that afternoon, she was called to Director Yuan's office on the ground floor. Director Yuan had her reading glasses on and a single sheet of paper in front of her, and she looked at it rather than at Adie's when she began speaking. "Your assignment has been modified," Director Yuan said. "You are being moved to the personal attendant rotation. His schedule, his meals, his private requests. 7 days a week, 6 in the morning until 8 in the evening. Your compensation has been adjusted accordingly." Adi sat with this information. "Adjusted how?" she said. Director Yoon looked up. Her expression was careful in the way of someone who had been careful for so long it had become the only setting available to her. "Doubled," she said. Then, after a pause, "This is not standard. The boss does not make this kind of arrangement for domestic staff. You should understand what it means." Addie's understood several things simultaneously. She understood that she should be alarmed. She understood that her mother had 3 months of dialysis treatments pre-authorized and the 4th was not yet funded. She understood that her younger sister's final year at university was suspended pending fees that Addie's had promised would arrive before the semester closed. She understood that Pride was expensive and she was currently operating at a deficit. She accepted the reassignment. The following morning, she arrived at his private dining room at 6 o'clock exactly with his breakfast on a tray. Director Yoon had briefed her like a mission. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. 2 soft-boiled eggs, 4.5 minutes precisely. 1 slice of sourdough, toasted, no butter. He reads in the morning. He does not take conversation with his coffee. You serve, you leave, you do not speak unless he speaks first. He was already at the table when she entered. Seated with his phone face down in front of him and his eyes on the door. He had been watching for her arrival, which meant he had been at the table before 6, which meant he had been waiting. She processed this and stored it in the section of her mind labeled things that are not her business to interpret. She set the tray down. She poured the coffee. The room was quiet with a particular quality of quiet that existed only around people who had decided that silence was not absence but presence. She turned to leave. "You skipped breakfast," he said. She stopped. "I eat in the staff kitchen, Mr. Ryu." He lifted his coffee. He said nothing else. She left. In the hallway, she stood against the wall for the count of 10 slow breaths and told herself with complete conviction that she was absolutely fine. She was already lying to herself, and some part of her knew it. A few days later, the problem had a name. The name was Baek Kwang-il, and he was one of Seong-min's senior partners in the legitimate branch of the Ryu Holdings, a man who operated in the space between legal and not legal with the ease of someone who had never been required to choose a side. He arrived at the estate on a Thursday for what Director Yoon had noted as a financial review meeting, and he would have been nothing more than a name on a visitor log, except that he found Addie's in the corridor outside the main meeting room while she was collecting the afternoon tea service. He stopped. He looked at her with the specific kind of ease that men wore when they had never in their lives been corrected. He spoke in English that was practiced and smooth. "You must be new," he said. "I would have remembered you." Addie's kept her eyes on the tray. "Thank you," she said, and stepped to move past him. He stepped with her. His hand came out and closed around her forearm, not hard, but with the particular casual entitlement of someone who had never in his life considered that touching someone without permission was a thing requiring permission. She went very still. The meeting room door opened. Ryu Seong-min stood in the doorway. He had heard enough. She knew this from the way his eyes moved first to Baek's hand on her arm and then to Baek's face, and the expression that crossed his own was not anger in the way that anger was usually visible, not raised voice or heated gesture. It was the other kind, the kind that lived underneath, the kind that was cold and precise and had already finished deciding what happened next before the room had registered there was a situation at all. He said in Korean, 3 words, low and final. "Take your hand off her." The temperature in the corridor changed. Baek Kwang-il released her arm. He straightened. He looked at Seong-min with the expression of a man who had just looked directly at the sun and was now very carefully not doing it again. She works for you, Beek said carefully. I was not aware. Sayangmin's eyes moved to Adiz. His voice, when he spoke to her, was the same register it always was. Go to Director Yoon. Tell her the afternoon review is finished. She went. She did not look back, but she heard him clearly as she turned the corner and walked down the corridor toward the stairs. Heard him speaking to Beek in that voice, the one that was quieter than his regular voice, which was already quiet, the one that lived several degrees below conversation. If you touch her again, he said, I will deal with you in a manner that is permanent and will not require further discussion. This is a courtesy. It is also the only one I will give. Adi stood in the stairwell with her back against the cool plaster wall and her tray braced against her forearms, and she held very still and decided, with great discipline, not to feel anything about what she had just heard. She felt everything about it. That evening, a knock on the door of her room in the staff wing. One of the junior attendants stood in the hallway holding a box. From Mr. Ryu, the young woman said, and was gone before Adiz could form a response. The box was cream-colored and tied with a dark ribbon. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at it for longer than was practical. Then she opened it. Inside, folded in tissue, was a pair of slippers. The kind that existed in a category of comfort she did not have a word for, lined with something she would later learn was cashmere, constructed by a craftsperson who had understood that the purpose of the thing was to make the wearer feel as though the floor was apologizing for its own hardness. Underneath them was a note. The handwriting was precise and spare, exactly like him. The floors in the staff wing are cold at night. We're Tiza. No signature. Adiz sat with the slippers in her lap for a long time. She was in serious trouble. She knew it. She put them on anyway because the floors were cold and she was practical, and she told herself that was the only reason. Over the following week, the gifts continued arriving outside her door with no ceremony and no explanation. A heated blanket for the staff wing room, which lost its warmth in the early hours. A small humidifier because the building ran dry in autumn and she had been managing a cough she was trying not to let interfere with her duties. A jar of shea butter from a Nigerian brand she had been searching for in every market in Itaewon without success, which meant that someone had specifically sourced it, which meant that someone had been paying a level of attention to her that she had not been aware she was being paid. Nothing in this house was invisible to Ryu Sayang-min. He delivered none of these things himself. They appeared. The quiet certainty of a man who had decided something and was executing it without fanfare or demand for acknowledgement. She found that more difficult to dismiss than grand gestures would have been. Grand gestures she could have named. This was different. This was attention of the most specific kind. The kind that required watching. The kind that said, I see you clearly enough to know what you need before you say it. She began being more careful. She controlled her expressions in his presence. She kept her eyes forward, her responses brief, her posture professional. She practiced the invisible efficiency Director Yoon had described as the ideal of the household staff. Present without being present. He noticed that too. She knew because on the Monday after she adopted this strategy, he appeared in the private kitchen while she was preparing his lunch. And without preamble, without greeting, he said, You have changed. She did not look up from the soup. I am focused on my work, mister. Ryu, you are trying not to look at me. She looked at him then, which was perhaps exactly what he had intended. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms loosely crossed, and the expression that was not quite watchful, and not quite amused but existed in the space between them. The particular expression of a man filing information. I am simply doing my job, she said. He pushed off the doorframe. He crossed the kitchen. He pulled out the stool at the island and sat down on it as though he had done this 100 times, which he had not, because in the week she had been here, she had never once seen him eat anywhere except his private dining room at the table she set with the precision Director Yoon had drilled into her. What are you making? He said. Adiz looked at the pot, then at him, then at the pot. Egusi soup, she said slowly. It is a Nigerian dish. I had ingredients left from the market run and I thought I would use them on my break rather than she stopped. He was not looking at the pot. He was looking at her hands on the counter. The way a person looked at something they found beautiful and could not fully stop looking at. She turned back to the stove. It will be ready in 20 minutes, she said. If you would like to try some, I can serve it in the dining room. I will eat here, he said. She turned to look at him. Era, he met her eyes. Here, he said. The same quality of voice he used for everything. Quiet, certain, landing exactly where he aimed it. Adi set a second bowl on the island. They ate across from each other in a silence that was not, she was alarmed to discover, uncomfortable. She watched him from the corner of her eye as he tasted the soup, waiting for the performance that people sometimes offered when they tried unfamiliar food, the exaggerated pleasure or careful diplomatic murmuring. It did not come. He ate the way he did everything else, with complete attention and no excess. "This is very good," he said after a while. "Thank you," she said. More silence. He refilled his own bowl. She watched him do it and felt something move through her chest that she did not have the discipline to name. "Tell me about Nigeria," he said. She looked at him. "You want to know about Nigeria? I want to know about you," he set his spoon down. "You are from Enugu. How do you know that?" He held her gaze. "I have files on all staff. Security protocol." She felt the specific chill of being known without permission. "You had me investigated. I investigate everyone who enters this estate." His voice did not change. It was not personal. Learning the content of someone's private life and then sitting across from them eating soup while discussing it feels quite personal, Mr. Ryu, another of those almost smiles. There and gone before it could be confirmed. He stood. He picked up his bowl and carried it to the sink and rinsed it himself, which was so far outside the expected behavior of the person who occupied this house that she simply watched without speaking. He set it in the drying rack. He looked at her. "Your sister's semester fees," he said. "They have been cleared." Adiz's mind stopped. "What?" she said. "The outstanding balance to her university. It was handled this morning." His voice was entirely even. "She will receive confirmation before end of day." She was across the kitchen in 3 steps. She caught his arm before he reached the door and felt every muscle in his forearm contract beneath her grip, felt him go completely still in the particular way of someone who was not accustomed to being touched and was deciding how to process it. She released him immediately, but she stepped in front of him. "You cannot do that," she said. Her voice was not steady anymore. "You cannot pay my sister's university fees without asking me. I did not ask for that. I did not give you permission to involve yourself in my family's." He was looking at her mouth. The words dried up. He looked up to her eyes. His own were very dark and very close, and the kitchen smelled like a goosey and cedar and something that was just the two of them existing in the same insufficient amount of space. "You carry it into this house every day," he said quietly. "The weight of everything they need and everything you cannot yet give them." He held her gaze. "I removed the weight. That is all." "That is not all," she said, and her voice came out rough with something that was not entirely fury, and she knew he heard it, knew from the slight shift in his expression that he heard exactly what was underneath the fury. "You cannot buy your way into my—" She stopped herself. She did not finish the sentence because she did not have the correct word for what he was attempting to buy his way into, and she was not going to name it in this kitchen in front of him. He waited. She stepped aside. He walked out. She stood in the kitchen with her hands still warm from where it had closed around his arm and her heartbeat making decisions she had not authorized. That night she called her sister. Her sister answered on the second ring and the sound of her voice was different, light in a way that it had not been in months. "Ada," she said. "Ada, you will not believe the university just sent a confirmation. Someone paid the full outstanding balance. I called to verify and they said it was a wire transfer and the name was in Korean, and I thought it was an error, but they said no. It was intentional. Ada, how it was not an error," Adiz said. Her sister's voice rose with questions. Adiz answered only one of them. "Study," she said. "Just focus on the work. Do not worry about the money right now. Study." After she ended the call, she sat in the dark of her room in the staff wing with the cashmere-lined slippers warm on her feet and the shea butter on the shelf and the humidifier running a soft cloud into the cool air, and she looked at the photograph of her family on the wall, her mother and her father before he passed, and her sister in her secondary school uniform. And she thought about a Korean crime boss who had cleared her sister's tuition without being asked and rinsed his own bowl and said that is all in a voice that made it perfectly clear it was not all. She was not going to fall for him. She repeated this to herself with the conviction of a woman who had been practical her entire life. She had built everything she had from practical choices. This was not a practical situation. This was a man who ran an empire held together by things she did not want to look at directly. This was a man who kept her at a professional distance even as he filled the space outside her door with evidence that she was anything but professional to him. This was a situation with no version where the arithmetic came out in her favor. She was absolutely not going to fall for him. She had 3 more days before everything broke open. It broke open because of Baek Kwang-il. He returned to the estate on a Friday evening. His presence on the visitor log was unexplained, which meant it was either tolerated or strategic, and neither option made Adi's comfortable. The main house had a particular quiet that evening. Most of the domestic staff had taken the monthly family half-day that the estate offered, which she had not taken because her assignment was personal attendance, and personal attendance did not take half-days. She was in the corridor outside the east sitting room, moving between tasks when Baek found her. This time there was no open door behind her. This time Seong-min was across the compound in the north building for what Director Yoon had noted as a consortium call. And Baek's 2 associates were stationed at the far end of the corridor with the specific arrangement of men who were there to ensure that nothing interrupted what was about to happen. She understood the shape of the situation in approximately 2 seconds. "Alone again," Baek said. His voice had the ease of someone who had come back because the first encounter had not cost him enough to change his plans. "I have work to attend to," she said. He moved to block her path. He smiled with the expression of a man who had decided in advance how this was going to go and was simply proceeding through the predetermined steps. Seong-min could keep her covered while she was inside these walls, he said. But she would need to be realistic about the nature of arrangements like these. He could offer her something more stable, more comfortable. "Get out of my way," she said. His hand shot out and closed around her wrist. The grip was different from the first time. "Not casual. Deliberate. Let go of me," she said. Her voice was completely level because panic was something she could not afford, and because she had been managing harder situations than this since she was 19 years old, and she was not going to give this man the satisfaction of her fear. She pulled against his grip. He held. The sitting room door opened. Ryu Seong-min took in the scene in the time it took to exhale. His eyes went to Baek's hand on her wrist and his expression did not change. And that was the part that made the air in the corridor drop several degrees, because she had learned by now that the absence of expression was not the absence of feeling. It was the feeling, contained and absolute, and pointed like a blade. He crossed the corridor without raising his voice and without reaching for the weapon she knew from weeks in this house was almost certainly on his person. He placed 2 fingers on a precise point on Baek's forearm with the particular knowledge of a man who had studied exactly how much pressure the body could receive before the mind stopped making decisions. Baek released her wrist. He made a sound. He stepped back. Seong-min placed himself between them. He spoke in Korean for 40 seconds. She caught fragments. The word for leave. The word for permanent. A phrase she could not translate, but whose meaning arrived through the change in Baek's face from calculation to fear. Baek looked at her once over Seong-min's shoulder, the look of a man filing something for later. Then he left. His associates left with him. The corridor returned to its customary quiet. Seong-min turned to her. He looked at her wrist first. She could already see the redness where Baek had held her. He reached out without asking, which she had come to understand was simply how he moved toward things, without performance of permission, but with complete gentleness once he arrived. And he lifted her wrist in both hands and looked at it with an expression she had not seen on his face before, not his controlled blankness. Something underneath it, something raw and leashed so tightly it was visible only in the line of his jaw and the particular stillness of his breathing. "Does it hurt?" he said. "No," she said. It was not entirely the truth. His jaw moved. He turned her wrist over slowly and examined the redness, and his breathing deepened, and she recognized it now, the deliberate regulation of a man pulling himself back from a response he had decided he would not allow himself. "Baek Kwang-il will not return to this estate," he said. She looked at his face. "What exactly did you say to him just now?" Seong-min lowered her wrist, but he did not entirely release it. He looked at her and the corridor was quiet, and the late afternoon light came through the window at the end of it and fell across both of them without asking. "I told him," Seong-min said, "that if he came back I would return him to his family in a condition that would require significant medical attention." He paused. "This was a restrained version of what I would prefer to do." Adis breathed out slowly. "You cannot make threats like that over a housekeeper," she said. The word felt wrong as she said it. She knew it felt wrong to both of them. "You are not a housekeeper," he said. "I literally am Mr. Ryu. This is literally my job title. Yo-Array." He stopped. He looked at her wrist in his hands and then at her face, and something moved across his expression that had no name she could assign to it. "You are not a housekeeper," he said again, quieter. and I do not want you to call yourself that." "Then what am I?" she said. It came out before she had decided to say it. Quiet and direct and more honest than the corridor deserved. He looked at her for a long moment. He did not answer. But his thumb moved once across the inside of her wrist, slow and unhurried, and it was so quiet and so deliberate and so unbearable that she pulled her hand back and took a step away from him and said, with a steadiness she was assembling in real time, "I need to finish the evening service." She walked away. She was shaking, and she did not look back to confirm that he was watching. He was watching. The following week moved differently. Seong-min was present in the estate as he always was, but the quality of his presence had shifted in a way that she could not measure precisely and could not stop noticing. He arrived in rooms she was working in with reasons that were plausible and thin. He asked questions that accumulated the way careful men accumulated things, one at a time, with patience, building towards something he had not yet named. On Monday, he asked her what music her grandmother had played in the evenings. On Tuesday, he asked whether she dreamed in English or Igbo. On Wednesday afternoon, while she was folding linens in the upstairs corridor, and he was standing with a document folder he had not opened in the 15 minutes since he arrived, he asked whether she had ever been in love. She went still with the sheet half folded in her hands. He said, "You don't have to answer that." She finished folding the sheet with careful precision. "Once," she said finally, "alongtimiaguwe." It did not go well. He did not ask what had happened. He said simply his loss. 2 words. Flat and factual like everything else he said. But she turned her face away to reach for the next sheet, and she did not let him see what those 2 words did to her expression. On Thursday evening, one of the senior staff found her in the laundry corridor. His name was Jung Myung-soo, and he had worked for the Ryu household longer than anyone on the property, including Director Yoon, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had watched enough to have lost his capacity for surprise about most things. He chose his moments carefully. This was one he had chosen. "You should be careful," he said, in the particular tone of someone delivering information he considered important enough to risk the delivery. Adiz looked at him steadily. "He has not looked at anyone the way he looks at you," Jung Myung-soo said. "Not in the years I have been in this house." He paused. This is not a warning against him. He is not a bad man. Not in the way the world has decided he is. Another pause, longer. But there are people around him who watch everything. Who would use the thing he is most careful about? "You mean me?" Adiz said. He nodded once, then he walked away. She went back to her room that night and sat with it. The weight of becoming, without intention, a vulnerability in the life of the most defended man in the city. She should have called the agency that night and requested a transfer. She should have made the practical choice, the safe choice, the choice that the version of herself who had built everything from discipline and clear eyes would have made. Instead, she put on her cashmere-lined slippers and sat on the edge of her bed and told herself she would figure it out tomorrow. She did not figure it out tomorrow. Tomorrow brought a dinner party. She discovered she had been seated at the main table when she arrived in the dining room with the first course, and found a place setting between an older woman she did not recognize and one of Seong-min's senior advisors, and Director Yoon murmured at her shoulder that the arrangement had been specified by the boss himself. "You are joking," Adiz whispered. Director Yoon did not joke. She had 18 minutes to change, and she used 15 of them, pulling out the only dress she owned that was appropriate for a formal dinner, a deep burgundy wrap dress her mother had bought her for her university graduation. It fit her the way things fit her, close at the waist, generous at the hips and chest, the kind of silhouette she had spent the better part of her 20s making her peace with, and had arrived, finally, at something approaching gratitude for. She put her hair up. It felt like armor. She walked back to the dining room with her spine straight and her heartbeat only slightly ahead of her. Seong-min was at the head of the table when she entered. He saw her. She watched him see her. His gaze moved over her with the same thorough quality it moved over everything, complete and without apology, and when it reached her face it stopped there and stayed. He did not look away. She was the one who looked away first, because she had to, because the alternative was standing in the doorway of his dining room and letting 12 people at the table watch her compose herself. She sat. He sat. Over the next 2 hours, his eyes found her with a regularity she eventually gave up pretending not to count. The woman to her left introduced herself as Seo Inwa. She was in her mid-60s with the energy of someone who had been the most formidable person in every room she had entered for the last 40 years, and had no plans to adjust this. She looked at Addis with measuring eyes that were not unkind. "So you're the one," she said. Addis picked up her water glass. "The one what?" Seo Inwa smiled. "The one who made him change his morning schedule." She said it with the precision of a surgeon making a first incision. He moved his morning coffee to the kitchen. For the first time in 9 years. "Because you take your break there at 7:15. Addis took a careful sip. "He thinks no one noticed," Seo Injwa continued pleasantly. "Everyone noticed," Addis said before she could stop herself. Seo Injwa laughed. It was genuine and warm and slightly delighted. "He is," she said, terribly obvious for a man who has built his entire reputation on being unreadable. Addis looked down the length of the table and found him watching her again. This time he did not look away when she caught him. The corner of his mouth moved. She looked away first. Again. After dinner, the guests moved to the main sitting room, and Addis began quietly collecting glasses because it was her job and because having something to do with her hands was a form of survival. She had collected 3 glasses when Seong Min appeared at her elbow so quietly she startled and nearly dropped them. "You do not need to do that tonight," he said. "I am staff," she said. "Not tonight." She turned to face him and they were closer than she had intended, the sitting room crowded enough that the distance between them had compressed into something that felt chosen rather than accidental. She could see the texture of his shirt. She could see the line of his jaw and the small, controlled tension in it. "What am I tonight, then?" she said. She had meant to say it with distance. It came out soft. He looked at her for a long moment. His mouth opened. Across the room someone laughed too loudly at something and the moment fractured. A colleague touched Seong Min's arm to draw his attention to a conversation that needed him. He went, but he looked back at her once as he crossed the room. Just once. The look of a man noting her coordinates so he could return to them. She set down the glasses she had been holding and went to stand by the window and told herself she was in complete control. She was not in complete control. The danger arrived 2 weeks later. It arrived with the patience of something that had been waiting for precisely the right crack to insert itself into. His name was Oh Ye-sung, and he led a rival organization that had been circling the edges of Ryu territory for 3 years without finding a way inside. He had tried money. He had tried territory negotiation. He had tried direct violence twice and lost both times. He had decided to try something different. Addis was at the market on a Thursday afternoon with one of the junior security staff, completing the weekly household grocery run, when the black car pulled to a stop alongside them at the edge of the market lot, and 2 men she did not know stepped out and the security guard was on the ground before she fully understood what was happening. She ran. She was fast when she needed to be and smart about it, cutting through the afternoon crowd and the market stalls with her head low and her movement unpredictable, changing direction twice without slowing. She dropped her phone into the open bag of a woman passing in the opposite direction so it could not be tracked. She pressed herself into a narrow service doorway between 2 stalls and watched the men sweep past, scanning the crowd. She waited 4 minutes. Longer than felt safe, shorter than she wanted. Then she walked directly to the nearest shop with a landline, which was a small bookstore run by an elderly man who took one look at her face and slid the phone across the counter without a word. She called the estate. Director Yoon answered. Addis said 3 words. "I need Seong Min." He was on the line in 30 seconds. She told him everything in order. The car, the men, the guard on the ground, her current location. She spoke the way she had spoken to Beek in the corridor, with his hand around her wrist, level and deliberate and without a single wasted word, because panic was still a luxury she could not afford and would not use. He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, "Do not move. Lock the door. I am coming." "Do not send someone," she said before she could think better of it. A pause. He heard it. What was in it? "Stay where you are," he said. "I am coming myself." He arrived in 14 minutes. Not his driver. Not his security team in advance. Him, first, out of a black car before it had fully stopped, covering the distance between the vehicle and the bookstore doorway in long, fast strides, and she stepped out and he looked at her from her face to her feet and back to her face, and the expression on him was not the one she knew. It was not controlled, and it was not managed, and it was nothing that had been disciplined into smoothness. It was older than all of that. Something that lived underneath everything he had built himself into. He put one hand against her face, his palm against her cheek, brief and warm and enormous. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. His exhale was controlled at the edges and not controlled in the middle, and she heard both. His security moved around them. The street was being handled. Everything was being managed with the quiet efficiency of an organization that had been absorbing crisis for decades. He kept his hand on her face for 4 seconds. Then he stepped back and his expression reassembled into something more familiar, and he said, "You are coming back to the estate. You will not go to the market again without a full team." She should have said many things. She said, "Okay." He looked at her. Just that word. She met his eyes. "You came yourself," she said. "Of course," he said. And it was so simple, so completely without performance or self-consciousness, that it hit her in the center of the chest like something she had not braced for. The ride back was quiet. He sat beside her and did not touch her, and did not speak, and was more present than anyone had ever been in her life. She watched the city move outside the window, and she thought about practical choices and arithmetic, and the version of herself who made sensible decisions. She thought about her mother's dialysis and her sister's degree and the reasons she had come here. She thought about cashmere slippers and a bowl rinsed without ceremony and 2 words spoken at a dinner table like a verdict. His loss. She thought about how she had already lost the argument with herself, had probably lost it weeks ago without admitting it. That night she knocked on the door of his private study. She had never done this. She had entered his spaces only when summoned. She had maintained the line between her world and his with the careful attention of someone who understood what it meant to cross it. She knocked anyway. "Come in," he said. He was at his desk with his jacket off, and his sleeves rolled, and he looked up when she entered, and something in his expression shifted immediately, recognizing that this visit was different from every other. She closed the door behind her. "I want to say something," she said, "and I need you to hear all of it without interrupting me." He leaned back in his chair. He folded his hands. He said nothing, which was his way of consenting. She stood in the center of his study with the fire behind her, and she said, "I know what this is. I know what I am in this house and what you are outside it. I know that the distance between your world and mine is not just geography, and I know that people like me do not usually end up in the story with people like you without being the person who gets hurt." She breathed. "I know all of that. And I know what you have done. The slippers and the tuition and Beak and today. I know what it means." She looked at him. He was completely still, his eyes on hers across the firelit room. "And I know it means something to you," she said, "the way it means something to me. And today, when someone tried to take me, the first thing I thought was that I needed you. Not safety, not help. Yo. And I am standing here telling you that because I am done lying to myself about it." The room held its breath. Seong-min rose from his desk. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, and she tilted her chin to hold his eyes, and he looked at her with an expression that had nothing left of its usual architecture. No management, no discipline, just something open and irreversible and entirely pointed at her. He raised his hand and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed the curve of her jaw, and he left them there. "I should tell you to leave," he said. His voice was very quiet. He was not telling her to leave. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I am not a safe man." His thumb moved along her jaw. "I have enemies. You know that now. Today was because of me. Because of what I am." He looked at her steadily. "If you stay, that danger stays with you." She leaned into his hand by the smallest fraction of distance, which was not much and was everything. "I grew up watching my mother make impossible things work with nothing," she said. "I know what real danger looks like, and I know what it does not look like." She held his eyes. "I am not afraid of the right things." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "I have wanted to tell you something for weeks." "Tell me," she said. "You are the most extraordinary person who has ever walked into this house," he said. "And I have been careful with you because you deserve careful." He breathed in. "And I do not want to be careful anymore." The words filled the room. The fire crackled. The city moved in the distance, enormous and indifferent, entirely unaware of the 2 people standing in a study in the northern hills, choosing each other against every reasonable calculation. She lifted her hand and placed it over his, still warm against her jaw, and held it there. He lowered his head. She raised her face. And the distance she had been keeping for weeks, the professional distance and the sensible distance and the distance that was really just fear wearing practical clothes, collapsed completely, quietly, without resistance. He kissed her the way she had known he would do everything, with complete attention and without excess, and then with something underneath that was not restrained at all. She held his face in both her hands and kissed him back with everything she had been carrying since a Tuesday morning in a marble bathroom, and 2 words spoken in the steam. The fire burned low, the study filled with a quiet that had never existed in it before, and outside the windows of the estate, the city of Seoul pulsed bright and restless and entirely indifferent to the fact that something had just become irreversible. Adis found the photograph 3 days later. It was on his desk, face down, and she turned it over automatically while cleaning because objects face down on surfaces were a habit she had never been able to stop herself from writing. A woman, Korean, early 20s, standing in a garden Adis did not recognize, smiling with the uncomplicated brightness of someone who had not yet learned what was coming. She set it back exactly as she had found it and finished the room and left. She did not ask about it that evening. She asked about it 2 evenings after that, because it had been sitting in her chest like a stone, and she had decided she was done pretending stones were not stones. They were in the sitting room. She put her book down. "The photograph on your desk," she said. "Who is she?" he said, his reading aside. He looked at the fire. "Her name was Choi Yuna," he said. "She was my fiancée. Was. She died. 5 years ago. There was an accident. Our car. I walked out. She did not." He said it without theater, measured and honest, and the absence of performance made it more devastating than any performance would have been. She looked at his profile in the firelight. He was somewhere else. "I kept the photograph," he said, "because I needed to remember what it looked like before I understood what I could cost the people around me." He paused. "I kept it to remember to stay back from people, to not become the danger to them that I was to her." He looked at her then. She held his gaze and did not flinch. "And yet here I am," she said softly. He breathed in. "Here you are," he said. The silence was honest and warm and held them both. "I am not Una," she said. "I am not going to break the same way." He crossed the room. He sat beside her and his hand found hers and he turned it over and held it with both of his, complete and careful. The way someone held something precious when they had decided the fear of losing it was not a reason to stop holding it. "I know that," he said. He looked at her hand. "I am afraid that what I am will break you in ways neither of us can anticipate." He looked up. "And I am more afraid of losing you than I am of the risk." She laced her fingers through his. "We are both afraid," she said. "Let's be afraid together." The threat that had been building in the background arrived on a Wednesday in the form of intelligence that one of his inner circle, a man named Lim Dong-wook who had been with the syndicate for 6 years, had been feeding information to Oh Yi-sung, information that included estate layouts, staff schedules, and, Seong-min told her with a controlled fury that was far more frightening than heat would have been, the specific information that she had become important to him. "They used you as bait," he said. "The market was not random. Someone told them your route and your timing." Adis sat with this, with the weight of having been turned into a weapon and aimed at the man across from her. "Lim Dong-wook has been dealt with," Seong-min said. She did not ask what dealt with meant. She understood enough about his world now to know some questions had answers she was not yet built to carry. "Oh Ye-sung has been notified that we are aware of his methods," he continued. "There will be a formal response." He looked at her. "I am telling you this because you deserve to know the full shape of the world you are choosing." She thought about Young Myung-soo's warning in the corridor. She thought about what it meant to be important to a man whose importance made him a target. She thought about Una and a car and a man who had spent 5 years building walls because he was afraid of what he cost people. She looked at Seong-min. "Tell me what you need," she said. His expression opened. Just slightly. Just enough. The response to Oh Ye-sung took 4 days. She did not witness it but felt it in the sharpened atmosphere of the estate, in the closed-room phone calls, in the way Seong-min checked on her 3 and 4 times each day in brief visits that always included his hand on her arm or her shoulder or her face, quick and deliberate, the touch of a man confirming that something he needed was still where he left it. On the 4th evening he came to the kitchen where she was making a goosey soup again, and he sat on his stool at the island and said, "It is resolved." She looked at him. "Is it because of me that you chose resolution over escalation?" "Yes," he said, simply, without apology or performance. She crossed to him. She stood in front of him and she put her hand against his face the way he always put his hand against hers, and he went completely still under the touch, and she held it there and looked at him. "I am not going to tell you what kind of man to be," she said, "but I am glad you are choosing." He closed his eyes for 2 seconds. His jaw moved beneath her palm. When he opened them again, the expression on his face was not something she had a word for in any language, but she understood it completely. "I want to ask you something," he said. His voice was different, lower, more careful in a way that was entirely new. "Ask," she said. "I want you to stay." He looked at her with everything unguarded. "Not as staff, not as anything temporary." He breathed. "As mine. I want to build something with you, Adiz. I want to stop watching you walk out of this house and wondering if I will eventually lose you the way I lose everything I don't protect properly." She thought about Enugu and Lagos and Seoul and all the distances she had crossed trying to build a life from practical choices. She thought about a mother who had raised 2 daughters on a nurse's salary and a faith the size of a building. She thought about how love was not supposed to make sense to the part of the mind that ran the numbers. It was supposed to make sense to the part that was older than numbers. "Yes," she said. His exhale was long and quiet and contained everything. He reached into the pocket of his shirt and produced something she had not expected. A ring. A slim gold band with a dark stone, deep and warm, the color of evening over the hills of Syeongbokdong. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "She was the most honest person I have ever known." He held it between them. "I have been carrying it for 10 days because I could not identify the right moment." He looked at her. "There is no right moment. There is only now." She gave him her hand. He slid it on. The kitchen smelled like food and cedar, and the beginning of something that had been building since a Tuesday morning in a marble bathroom, when a man had said words that cracked open something neither of them had been prepared for. They married in the spring, not with syndicate ceremony or the kind of event that required security briefings and guest list negotiations. They married in the garden of the estate on a morning when the cherry trees were doing what cherry trees did in Seoul in April, without permission and without apology, filling the air with something that felt like the world trying to say something kind. Seo In-hwa attended and wept from the second row and said afterward she had known from the dinner table that first evening, from the way he had looked down the length of the room and found Adiz like a compass finding north. Director Yoon stood in the back in her best hanbok and looked satisfied with the particular satisfaction of a woman whose understanding of this household had always been more complete than she let on. Young Myung-soo caught Adiz's eye during the ceremony and nodded once. The nod of a man who had warned her to be careful and was glad she had been careful enough to stay. Adiz's mother flew from Enugu. She met Ryu Seong-min in the garden on the morning of the ceremony, and she looked him over for a long, complete moment, and then she said in English that left no room for interpretation, "If you hurt my daughter, I will not pray for you. I will pray against you, and I have a very good record." Seong-min looked at her with complete seriousness and said, "If I hurt her, your prayers will not be necessary. I will handle my own punishment." Her mother blinked. Then she laughed, loud and genuine, and she patted his arm and walked away. Adiz, who had heard every word, pressed her lips together and looked at the sky. Her sister flew in from London. She shook Seong-min's hand and then pulled him close and said something in his ear that made him smile, a real smile, wide and rare and completely undefended. Adiz spent the rest of the morning trying to find out what her sister had said. She never did. The ceremony was golden. The air smelled like blossoms and her grandmother's melodies because Adiz hummed one quietly to herself while she waited in the garden and did not hear him approach until his hand settled at her waist and his voice was warm at her temple. "You are singing," he said. She leaned back into him. "You always find me when I sing."
I always will,
he said. 6 months later, in the bedroom of an estate that had stopped being a fortress sometime around the moment a woman had told a feared man she would shower with him over her professional integrity and walked out with her bucket and her dignity entirely intact, Adiz sat at the edge of the bed and stared at a small white object in her hands for a long time. Then she went to find her husband. He was in the study. Jacket off, files across the desk, phone to his ear, the particular expression he wore when the conversation had grown complicated and the other party was testing his patience. He looked up when she entered. He looked at her face. He said something brief into the phone and ended the call and stood up. She held up the object. He looked at it. He looked at her. His expression moved through something she could only describe as tectonic, a slow and vast shifting of something fundamental, the rearrangement of a foundation. He crossed the desk in 2 steps. He took the object from her hand. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. His eyes were bright. "Seong-min," she said softly. He was not going to cry. "I am not crying," he said. He was absolutely crying. He pulled her against him with both arms and held her with the particular grip of a man who had spent 5 years braced against loss and was now, finally, learning what it felt like to hold something that was staying. She felt his chest move against her cheek. She felt his heartbeat, the one she had memorized over months of standing close to him in kitchens and corridors and studies and gardens. Steady and certain, like everything else about him. She thought about a Tuesday morning. About steam and marble and a voice that had said words she had carried like a stone for weeks before she understood they were not a stone at all. They were a door. She thought about slippers and tuition and a man who came himself when she needed him. She thought about a grandmother's ring in a garden and her mother saying, "I will not pray for you, I will pray against you." She thought about fear and choosing anyway. She thought about love that made no sense to the part of you that ran the numbers and complete sense to everything older than numbers. She held her husband and let herself be held. Outside the windows of the Ryu estate, the city of Seoul moved and pulsed and blazed with light, indifferent to everything outside its own vast and restless survival, the way cities always were. But inside, in a study lined with books and firelight and the quiet accumulated evidence of a life being built deliberately from the ruins of power and grief and 5 years of careful distance, something new was beginning. Something small and brave and entirely theirs. The way all real things begin, not with certainty, not with safety. With two people who looked at each other across every distance that existed between them and decided that the distance was not the point. The point was the crossing. And they had already crossed. This is where their story finds its fullness, besties. Not in the danger survived, or the enemies outlasted, or the empire that continued running outside the walls of a house that had finally learned what warmth was. In a kitchen on an ordinary morning. In a man who rinsed his own bowl. In a woman who sang when she worked and wore cashmere slippers to bed and refused, every single time, to make herself smaller than she was. In a child beginning, in the spring, in a city full of light. And the story will be told someday the way all good stories are told, with wonder, with warmth, and with the quiet, unshakable knowledge that some things in this world are worth every difficult and beautiful step it takes to reach them.